You don't forget the sound of a phone at 2:35 a.m. Not when you're 45, successful, and supposed to be asleep beside your very pregnant wife. I was downtown in the office. I'd pulled a late-night prep for a deposition and dozed off on the couch in the firm's war room. The ringtone jolted me upright, my wife Avery's name glowing on the screen like a warning flare. "Julian," she gasped. "It's time. The baby's coming. I'm already at the hospital. Just, please hurry." She sounded scared. I didn't hesitate. Rain came down in sheets as I tore through the Boston streets in my BMW, tires slicing through puddles. My tie was half-tied, the steering wheel damp with sweat and water. I kept picturing her in that delivery bed, alone, afraid. She hadn't been due for another 3 weeks, but she always said this baby would come early. Something about gut feeling. The maternity wing at St. Vincent's was quiet, too quiet for what she described the past week. There were no co-workers from the baby shower. No friends, no family camped in the hallway with balloons or flowers. The nurse at the front desk looked up from her computer, startled by my entrance. "Mr. Carter?" "Yes, Julian Carter." My wife, Avery, she called me, said she was delivering. Her face changed slightly, eyes flicking to a clipboard, then back up to me. "She's in room 7. Your brother is with her and the baby." The sentence didn't land all at once. I heard the words, but they didn't make sense. "My brother?" "Yes, Dr. Dominic Carter." I nodded like it made sense, like I wasn't frozen in place. Like my brother, a surgeon at this hospital, had every reason to be there before me, before the father. I moved slowly, not out of fear, but calculation. 15 years as a defense attorney taught me one thing. When something feels off, it is. I walked past the nurse's station, soaked and silent, and stopped just short of the delivery room door. It was cracked open. The hallway was still. I took out my phone, turned on the voice recorder, and placed it back in my pocket. Then I waited and listened. The door stayed open just enough. Inside, their voices floated through, muffled by hospital walls and the rhythm of machines. I stood still. 15 years in a courtroom teaches you patience. You don't interrupt a confession. You document it. Avery's voice came first, soft, tired, but not panicked like she'd sounded on the phone. "He still doesn't know, does he?" Dominic chuckled. That familiar, smug chuckle I'd grown up hating. "Jules? Please. He's probably still thinking the baby's early because of stress or something. Let him believe it." My hand tightened in my coat pocket. Not from surprise, from recognition. The tone, the words, they weren't stumbling through guilt. This wasn't a moment of remorse. It was coordination. She sighed. "You really think he's never going to figure it out?" Dominic scoffed again. "You've been married to him, what, 8 years? You know how he is. Always so noble. Busy saving everyone else, too proud to look under his own roof. By the time he realizes it, we'll be long gone." There was a rustle, then Avery's voice again, lower this time. "His money gave us everything. The condo, the car, the firm connections. I just need to get through another 6 months before I file. We do this right, and the divorce settlement sets us for life." I leaned back against the wall. The air felt colder than it should have. Even with the heat blasting down the hallway vents, I felt like I'd stepped outside into the storm again. But I didn't move. I didn't breathe loud enough to betray my presence. I just listened. Then came the final knife. "I'm glad he's got brown eyes," Avery whispered. "Makes it easier." Dominic laughed softly. "That kid's got mine. You saw it the second he opened his eyes. That green, you can't fake that." I closed my own eyes for a beat, not from emotion, but from calculation. I wanted to remember that line, word for word. It would matter. They kept talking. About the baby's name, one I hadn't even been asked to choose. About who would pretend to co-parent and how long Avery needed to play the loving wife before the legal side would be ripe for harvesting. Dominic mentioned how the promotion at my firm would mean more assets in the split. Avery called me a generous idiot. That's when the phone in my pocket buzzed. An incoming call. I silenced it instantly, heart thudding once. They didn't hear it. I let the recording run another 2 minutes. Just enough to catch Dominic joking about finally getting the girl and the inheritance. I didn't need more. I slipped away the same way I came, quiet, measured, invisible. At the elevator, I removed the phone and labeled the recording. Delivery room confession, 3:06 a.m. Driving home, the rain had stopped, but Boston still glistened like the city was sweating something out. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't punch the steering wheel like they do in movies. I just drove. The pieces were already falling into place in my mind like closing arguments. I'd spent my life building airtight cases. Today, I became the case. And I'd be damned if I let them walk away with my name, my legacy, or my son. I got home before dawn. The house felt like a museum of lies. Staged photos, monogrammed towels, a half-written baby registry note on the kitchen counter that suddenly looked like evidence of fraud. I didn't sit. I didn't shower. I went straight to my home office and locked the door. This wasn't the first time I'd built a case against someone I knew. But it was the first time the someone was my own brother. And the woman I'd married. 15 years of criminal defense had given me more than courtroom instincts. It had trained me to back everything up. Automatically. Every computer Avery used synced to my private cloud. Every text, calendar event, and email had a shadow. It took 10 minutes to access her backups, 30 to decrypt her messages. What I found confirmed every word I'd heard in the delivery room. There were photos, late-night meetups disguised as case consults, calendar entries for fake depositions. One email chain between Avery and Dominic, dated 9 months ago, outlined how they'd agreed to covertly establish primary paternity optics. Their language was cold, medical, like I was a lab specimen they were fooling. One message from Dominic read, "He's a damn Boy Scout, trusting, boring, but perfect for funding a future. We keep him around until the papers are clean. Then it's ours." They used my loyalty like rope to hang me, but rope works both ways. By 7 a.m., I had indexed 3 years' worth of digital exchanges between them, cross-referenced with my own travel and billing records. Every time they saw each other, I was out of town. Every lie had a date and a location. But this couldn't be just about cheating. That would be small. This was about professional betrayal, financial deceit, and reputational fraud. If I wanted to dismantle them completely, I had to build this like a criminal enterprise. And so I did. First, the hospital. I reached out anonymously to Dr. Chloe Hines, a second-year resident I'd met at a medical fundraiser 2 months back. Sharp, no nonsense. She owed me a favor after I got her sister's DUI dropped. She remembered Dominic. "He overrode the birth protocol," she said flatly. "Had her moved to a private suite at 2 a.m., used his badge to bypass registration. Said it was a high-risk case. It wasn't. Would you testify to that?" "Off the record, yes. On the record, I'll need protection." "You'll have it." Second, the firm. Avery had used our joint card for firm-related expenses. I now tracked those against her case files. 2 spa trips. A hotel in Vermont she claimed was for a deposition that never existed. She billed over $2,700 in expenses tied to no actual client. I flagged each one, copied the receipts, and prepared a memo for her firm's ethics committee. Third, the timeline. I built a visual board. Every date they were together, every lie they fed me, every moment I had been out defending clients or sitting on bar association panels while they plotted in my blind spot. It wasn't rage driving me anymore. It was clear. Rage makes noise. Clarity makes moves. By nightfall, my case file had its own folder on the server. Operation Legacy. I poured a glass of bourbon. Not to celebrate, not to numb, but to mark the shift. From this moment forward, I was no longer their target. I was their reckoning. People think lawyers win in the courtroom. That's wrong. We win in silence, through timing, precision, and the art of making someone fall on their own sword while thinking it was their idea. By the time Avery returned home, cradling the newborn like a trophy, I had already set everything in motion. She kissed my cheek like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't heard her say my name was worth money and the child in her arms had green eyes for a reason. I didn't flinch. I held the door for her, carried her bag upstairs, asked how she was feeling, played the doting fool. It wasn't a weakness. It was patience. While she rested, I made my final checklist. First, I submitted a quiet but formal complaint to St. Vincent's Compliance Office, flagging Dominic's badge activity, the manipulation of birthing procedures, and the off-the-record admission from Dr. Hines. I attached anonymous screenshots and metadata trails. By noon, 2 board members had accessed the hospital surveillance feed from that night. One of them had golfed with me 3 weeks earlier. Second, I packaged the misuse of funds and fraud indicators into a whistleblower packet. No name attached, just a leak to Avery's law firm's internal ethics council, timestamped and indexed. Let them investigate. They'd find more than I did. That's how corporate cannibalism works. Third, I sent an envelope, printed photos, financial inconsistencies, and the transcribed delivery room conversation to the Massachusetts Bar Association's grievance committee. Avery may have had tenure at her firm, but the bar doesn't care about tenure, cares about ethics. And finally, I submitted a private petition to the Family Trusts Board, chaired by my mother, requesting a full audit of Dominic's recent actions under the medical philanthropy wing. His name was on a wing of the hospital built with Carter Foundation funds. If the rumors became evidence, that name wouldn't be there much longer. I worked in silence for 3 days. Then the phone calls started. Avery's firm called a late-night emergency meeting. Dominic's assistant left him a voicemail. "You need to come in now." My phone remained silent. I didn't need updates. I was the update. On Friday morning, I walked past Dominic in the hospital corridor. He nodded like nothing was wrong, too arrogant to imagine the ground already cracking beneath him. He wore those $1,000 shoes like armor. By noon, I watched from across the street as 2 board members entered his office with folders. No smiles, no knock. At 2:12 p.m., I received a text from Dr. Hines. Compliance opened an investigation. Dominic's been pulled from rotation. At 3:40 p.m., Avery called me. Panicked. "Something's happening. I think someone reported us. I don't know what's going on." I let it ring 4 times. Then I answered, calm as ever. "Maybe it's just the baby," I said, and hung up. Room 7 hadn't changed. Same antiseptic smell. Same pale blue curtain drawn halfway. Same baby in the bassinet, sleeping without a clue of the storm brewing around him. But this time, I wasn't the man who walked in uncertain and confused. I wore the same suit I'd had tailored for my managing partner announcement. Charcoal gray, 3-piece, pressed. My tie was red. Not a coincidence. Avery looked up from the bassinet and smiled weakly, tired and rehearsed. Dominic stood by the window, arms crossed, pretending he had any claim to the room. He looked at me like a man expecting a scene. Maybe a punch, maybe yelling. He got neither. I closed the door behind me and pulled a folder from my briefcase. "I won't be long," I said, setting the folder on the rolling table near Avery's untouched lunch tray. She shifted, nervous now. "What's that?" "The evidence," I replied. "Proof of your betrayal, his involvement, and your combined disregard for the law, ethics, and basic human decency." Dominic took a step forward. "Julian, listen." "No." I cut in, voice level. "You listen. You don't get to play doctor and thief in the same breath. You overrode hospital policy to ensure a private birth. You falsified medical urgency to clear protocol. You manipulated records. And now, you've been reported to the Compliance Board, to the Ethics Committee, and to the foundation that paid for your surgical wing." His eyes flicked toward the window, like maybe he could run. I turned to Avery. "You submitted over a dozen fraudulent reimbursements to your law firm. You colluded with Dominic to financially entrap me under the guise of marriage. And I have your conversations recorded, dated, backed up in multiple encrypted drives." She paled. "You recorded us?" I gave a slight nod. 3:06 in the morning. The door cracked. "You two weren't exactly whispering." Her mouth opened, but I wasn't there for confessions. I was there for the consequences. Dominic's phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket and blanched. "What is it?" Avery asked. He didn't answer. Then her phone went off 2 buzzes, then a third. She fumbled with it, read the screen, and her hands began to shake. "My firm. They're calling an emergency review." I nodded once. "They have your expense report and the transcript of your delivery room chat." "You're destroying us," she said, a whisper. "No," I replied calmly. "You did that the moment you decided my name was worth more than my trust. I'm just delivering the verdict." She stood now, voice rising. "You said you loved me." "I did," I said, "but I never loved the version of you that planned this." I walked over to the baby. He stirred but didn't wake. A small, green-eyed face. "I won't raise another man's child under my name, but I won't punish a child for your sins, either. He's innocent." Avery wept silently now, one hand covering her mouth. Dominic said nothing. His face was stone, but his eyes flicked toward the door like a man expecting handcuffs at any moment. I straightened my jacket. "I'll have papers delivered within the week. Divorce, financial separation, parental clarification. You'll receive everything through counsel. We won't speak again outside legal channels." I started toward the door. "Julian," Avery said behind me. I stopped. I turned my head halfway. "Don't," I said. "We're done." And I walked out without looking back. Some men celebrate victories with champagne. I watched mine unfold from behind polished glass and oak. The delivery room confrontation hadn't even cooled before the headlines started circling through hushed corridors. Hospitals don't advertise scandal, but word moves fast when a top surgeon gets yanked off his shift midweek with no explanation. By Monday, Dominic's suspension was official. Pending investigation. That's how they word it when the damage is already done. I didn't need to call the board. They called me. Quiet thanks. Promises to handle it delicately. One of them even asked if I'd consider serving on the compliance oversight panel. I declined. I'd made my point. At Avery's firm, it was less subtle. Whistleblower protocols mean internal reviews. Internal reviews mean email audits. Email audits led to things I hadn't even found. Fabricated hours, overbilled clients, one suspicious vacation charged to a dead file. The managing partner, Scott Levin, called me himself. "Julian, off the record, she's finished. We can't touch this. Not with your name involved." "I understand," I replied. "She'll be informed through counsel." "She already knows," he said flatly. "We locked her out of the system this morning." Over the next 2 weeks, the dominoes didn't just fall. They snapped clean in half. Dominic's hospital privileges were revoked pending a full ethics hearing. He lawyered up, of course. Claimed he'd been set up, that the relationship started after Avery and I were emotionally estranged. Didn't matter. You don't override patient protocols for your sister-in-law without paperwork. You don't bypass badge logs and scheduling systems without someone noticing. And you don't get sympathy when you've been bragging about finally getting the girl and the inheritance on a voice recording now submitted to 3 different boards. Avery moved out quietly. No announcement, no goodbye note, just a missing toothbrush and a dead phone line. She tried to reach out once, through her attorney, of course. They offered a proposal, joint custody, a modest split of assets, no public disclosures. I replied with 3 words, "See you in court." They didn't call again. Behind closed doors, I kept moving. The family trust froze Dominic's access pending investigation. My mother, ever the matriarch, called me with a rare sense of gravity in her voice. "I've rewritten the will," she said. "His son is not a Carter. And you," she paused, "you've upheld the name." I didn't reply. She didn't need me to. Every morning I came into the office before sunrise. Not to bury myself in work, but to make room. Room to process the quiet satisfaction of watching justice walk, not run. Room to feel the absence of betrayal like a scar that had finally stopped bleeding. Room to reclaim everything they thought they'd taken. A new nameplate went up outside my door that month. Julian Carter, Senior Managing Partner. Carter, Doyle and Sharp LLP. It gleamed like the truth. Not loud, but permanent. From the 42nd floor, Boston looks clean. Not honest, not kind, but sharp, efficient, and filtered through tempered glass. That morning, sunlight bounced off the Hancock Tower and spilled across the desk where I sat reviewing quarterly reports. 5 years. Long enough for the dust to settle. Long enough to separate punishment from peace. The private investigator I kept on retainer had delivered his final update. I didn't need it, but I read it anyway. Dominic Carter, demoted to a small-town clinic in western Massachusetts. Salary cut by 70%. Reputation stripped. His name, once etched in marble on the surgical wing at St. Vincent's, had been removed 2 years ago after a final board vote. The new plaque bore no surname, just a foundation tag. Clean. Avery. Disbarred from practicing law in the state of Massachusetts after a 2-year investigation. She'd tried for a paralegal certificate last year. Failed twice. Currently working as a freelance transcriptionist. No office, no firm, no leverage. Clean. The boy, 6 years old now. Public elementary. A good student according to the report. Quiet. Green eyes. Last name? Martinez. Avery's maiden name. Not Carter. Not mine. Clean. I closed the folder. People had warned me I'd grow bitter. That vengeance would eat away at me over time. But they didn't understand the difference between revenge and order. I didn't chase their destruction. I simply allowed the truth to do what it always does when given a little light. And I kept moving. The firm expanded. New offices in DC and Chicago. My name, Carter, sat cleanly at the top of every letterhead, every contract. Not because of ego, but because names matter. They tell the story when the words are gone. I donated to 3 law schools anonymously. Funded a new ethics scholarship in memory of my father, who died believing both his sons would carry the family's name with honor. One of us did. Some nights, I still heard Avery's voice in my head. Not the crying or the begging, but the casual cruelty in that hospital room. You think he'll ever figure it out? I hadn't flinched. Not because I was unfeeling, but because I refused to hand my legacy to people who treated loyalty like currency. I stood at the window, sipping black coffee from a white ceramic mug bearing the firm's logo. Clean lines, sharp corners, everything I built, untouched by the filth they tried to smear across it. Below, the city moved, fast and blind. Above, I stayed still, unshaken, undefeated, unforgiving. The email arrived just after noon. Subject: final confirmation, nameplate removal. Attached was a photo, simple, dignified. A brushed metal plaque now hung in the hospital atrium where Dominic's name once stood, replaced with a new dedication. The Hayes Foundation Surgical Wing. Established in honor of integrity, not inheritance. I didn't need to reply. My signature was already etched on the donation that funded the new cancer research lab under the Hayes name, my mother's maiden name. The legacy Avery and Dominic tried to hijack had been lifted above their reach. Resurrected, untouched. My mother called later that evening. She didn't mention Dominic. She hadn't in years. Her voice was soft but strong, the way it always got when she wanted something to stick. "Julian," she said, "I saw the new plaque. Your father would have approved." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. It was overdue. "There's one more thing," she added. "Dominic called me this week, about my birthday, and I told him not to come." That night, I sat in the study and read over the final draft of the trust documents. It had taken years, revisions, quiet conversations with the attorneys my family had worked with for generations. But it was done. Dominic was formally removed. His son was excluded by lineage. My request, but worded tactfully. Still, one line remained untouched. A discretionary educational grant may be offered to any child proven to be of demonstrable need and academic promise, regardless of blood. That was mine, quietly inserted, because the boy had done nothing wrong. He carried their eyes, not their crimes. Let him have a chance. But not my name, not my legacy. A week later, I stood outside my mother's house, her 75th birthday gathering underway. Inside, cousins laughed, wine poured, gifts stacked near the mantel. My phone buzzed, Dominic's number. I let it ring. He didn't leave a message. Some stories don't end with a bang. They taper off like static fading after a storm. What mattered was that the truth had held, that the Carter name meant something again, that when people said Julian Carter, they thought of strength, not scandal. As I stepped inside, my mother greeted me at the door. "Welcome home," she said simply. I looked around the room, full of people who hadn't lied, who hadn't tried to sell my life behind my back. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man rebuilding. I felt like a man who had won. Not loud, not messy, just permanently,